Well, it appears my channel has hit another milestone. I didn't think more than 100 people would want to watch my not so spectacular content, but here we are. Either way, I'm deeply thankful. And that got me thinking, what kind of special video should I make to celebrate 100 subs? Subs. That's it! How about we look at a bunch of games where you control submarines? So, introducing another new segment for this channel, GistList, a series where I, or Darius and Sure if they really wanted to, look at a bunch of games that fit a certain theme or criteria. The theme for this video being games where you play as or pilot submarines. Even if it's solely for one level or an optional segment, it's going on the list. Let's start things off with something simple. This is Aqua Kitty UDX, an indie game by TikiPod. The story for this title is full of whimsy. A world mostly inhabited by cats is suffering from a global milk shortage, and some have taken it upon themselves to mine the white stuff from the depths of the ocean floor. It's up to you, and maybe a friend as well, to protect these milk miners with your submarine from the horrors of the deep. Aqua Kitty UDX is an arcade-like shoot-'em-up. It plays very similar to Midway's Defender games. You go stage to stage trying to protect milk miners from the enemies, and maybe trying to get a high score while doing so. The level's wrapped by the by, so if you keep going left, you'll find yourself on the right eventually. In certain stages, tougher enemies may drop power-ups for you, so use those to your advantage. There are also a few bosses to fight in some levels, and you can upgrade different attributes for your sub with green gems you've collected. It's a fun little shmup. The pixel art is also very nice, and the soundtrack sounds like it came right from the Commodore 64. This game isn't very deep, pardon the pun, but check it out if you like what you see here. For our next game, we have another shmup. This is In the Hunt, a 1993 arcade game from Irem, which was made by the same team who would later work on the Metal Slug series. Though by looking at the incredible pixel art, you could probably figure that out on your own. It might only have 5 stages and only be around half an hour long, but this game is really fun plus pretty challenging. I mean, it was originally an arcade title, and those things were always purposely made difficult to get players to buy more credits. Still, even when the game is kicking by capital B, it's a wonderful time. It's been re-released on some modern platforms, so give it a look if you can. Following that on our list is Captain Sub, a TSIware game that was part of the Go series. Not the GG series like the one Sure looked at in that compilation game. This is from a different series of 200 DSi point titles, but they were all branded under the name Go series in Europe, only adding to the confusion. Just thought I'd clear that up. Back on topic. In this game, you play as the titular Captain Sub, as they go from level to level devouring gold from the depths of the ocean. Like, I'm not even joking, they literally eat the stuff. You can only carry 10 pieces at a time though. Once you're fully loaded, you can return to your mothership to heal yourself and use the gold to extend your life meter. Destructible blocks and ocean threats may get in your path of riches. They can be neutralized with torpedoes you can fire upwards and sideways, though you can never kill enemies, just temporarily stun them. You can also dash by holding down the B button, but I never use it since it also drains your health. What is this, Lunar Genesis? When you think you're done with the main area, you can move on to the boss arena, where your goal is to collect as much treasure as you can while evading their attacks. The bosses will also have to be neutralized too if you want to collect all of it. This is a fine game, but you can't play it anymore because, you know, company bankruptcy and 3DS eShop closure. But if you can find some way to play it, it might be worth checking out. Now we have Radar Mission on the Game Boy, and here we were looking at Game B specifically. What's Game A? Well, have you ever played the board game Battleships? It's for the most part just that, only on Game Boy. In Game B, you pilot a sub, and your goal is to destroy all the enemies or their submarine before your opponent could do that to you. You can also fire at these money bags to collect cash for upgrades in the next round, but I swear they're almost impossible to hit. Oh, and if you're having trouble finding the enemies, you can submerge to look at your radar and get an idea how to approach them. This game is alright, though it's probably more fun playing against an actual opponent instead of the CPU. The visuals and soundtrack are nice also. Now, let's get to a game most of you have probably heard of, Steel Diver for the 3DS, which came out around the system's launch if I recall. Though out of the 3 first-party launch titles, I think this is the one people talked about the least. I mean, it was a new IP going up against familiar territory, it was destined to happen. Even though Steel Diver came out in 2011, its prototype actually dates all the way back to 2004 on the original DS. It was a playable tech demo in E3 of that year, and that demo in question has actually been dubbed as a ROM. So hey, we actually get to try this thing out. And yup, this is most definitely a Steel Diver prototype. But man, I want to know which bonehead decided to give this demo an incredibly strict time limit of 2 minutes, which is only barely enough time to complete the mission. Anyway, let's talk about the full game. Steel Diver has 3 game modes: Missions, Periscope Strike, and Steel Commander. Let's start with Missions, the main game mode. There are 10 stages in total, and you can choose between 3 different subs, which all have different stats and abilities. You pilot the submarine with the cockpit on the bottom screen, and adjust things like the ship's acceleration, depth, and angle. You can also fire torpedoes. I really wish this game had button controls like its tech demo, but you can only play with touch controls, which I find much harder to use personally. Most stages only require you to reach your destination within the time limit, but some actually have buttons to fight at the end, and they're pretty challenging to take on, especially with these controls. Let's move on to Periscope Strike. In this mode, you move around your 3DS to aim and shoot at enemy ships within the time limit. You can also dive to evade enemy fire. It only has 3 levels, and I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of 3DS games that are played using the gyroscope, but I've done with worse. Finally, we have Steel Commander. This mode plays like a strategy game. Your goal is to guide your submarine to destroy the opponent's enemy base, while they're trying to do the same to you. Attacking the enemy ships is done very similar to how it is in Periscope Strike. The only difference being you have limited shots and you're on a stricter time limit. But be careful, the ships can counterattack using depth charges, though they only have a 1 in 3 chance of actually hitting you. Once you destroy the enemy base or their submarine, you win! I think this mode might be my favorite of the 3. You can also play against another person using download play, which is pretty neat. Overall, even though Steel Diver is quite shallow in content, there's still some fun to be found in this game. The soundtrack is pretty catchy too. If you can find the game for cheap, look into it. I mean literally, the game has a cool holographic cover. But the Divers of Steel don't end here, as we've got another title in 2014, Steel Diver Sub Wars, a free to start game that was released on the eShop. This title plays similarly to the missions mode of the original, but there are some key differences. You can now control the sub with buttons, thank you. The game is played from the submarine's point of view instead of a side view. Your ship could no longer heal from staying on the surface. Instead, you'll now have to find repair crates to restore health. And finally, you can send messages using Morse code. But I think this is more for the multiplayer. Oh yeah, there's not just missions. Sub Wars also has online multiplayer where you can battle other people. But I don't think anyone plays it anymore. As for the missions themselves, each type has 3 stages that have a different difficulty level. Stages might have you driving through rigs, defeating enemy subs, or destroying an enemy base. For every mission you clear, you get a medal, and the more medals you have, the more missions you'll unlock. I think this game is much better than the original, but unfortunately you can't buy it anymore due to the 3DS eShop's closure, which is a shame. I also remember using it to install Homebrew on my 3DS, but you didn't hear that from me.
What were we talking about?
Also, Peppy from Star Fox appears as a salesman for the full version? This must be a side gig or something. What's with the 3DS and rabbits that want me to spend money? For the next few titles, we'll be looking at games that aren't entirely submarine focused, but have levels where you pilot one. Since we brought up Star Fox earlier, how about we look at Star Fox 64 3D? In the Aquas level, you pilot the Blue Marine instead of your R-Wing, a submarine built by Slippy since the planet is mostly made of water. It controls very similar to the R-Wing, but lacks the ability to charge shots. Instead of firing bombs, it can launch torpedoes, which it has an infinite amount of. Be sure to use them often, as the depths of the ocean can get very dark, and these are the only things you have to light your way. I thought this level was a nice change of pace. Its music and atmosphere is very nice too. Oh, and to jump back to Steel Diver Sub Wars real quick, the Blue Marine was actually a sub you could purchase and use as DLC in that title. Maybe that's the real reason why Peppy was there. Following that, here's UnMetal, an MGS parody by Unepic Entertainment. This game is freaking hilarious, and there's some lines from it I'm still quoting to this day.
And
1972, a crack commando unit threw me in a prison for a crime I didn't commit.
You're under arrest for a crime you didn't commit.
In Chapter 6, Jesse Fox finds himself trapped in a hangar and is forced to pilot a submarine to escape. I'm not gonna lie, this section kinda blows. The sub has incredibly loose controls and gets damaged even by the slightest graze against the wall. I feel like I could destroy this thing just by breathing on it hard enough. There's also a boss fight against the giant eel at the end, where you have to fire torpedoes into its mouth as it tries to bite your sub. Its pattern is a bit tricky to get the hang of, but it's certainly doable. This chapter might be one of my least favourite ones in this game, but it serves its purpose. Ooh, here's a familiar title. Next on the list is Super Mario Land, because in World 2-3, there's a shooting segment where Mario pilots a submarine called Marine Pop. Other than the fact that there's a fight with a giant seahorse at the end, there's not much to talk about here. This and the Skypop segment are pretty mindless. To quote my old self, it ain't no R-Type. But Mario isn't the only character from his series that's piloted a sub, because in Wario Land the Shake Dimension, or Wario Land Shaky if you live in America, there's a couple of levels where Wario has to travel underwater in his submarine. I freaking love that name. All you really need to do in these segments is move back and forth, adjust the ship's angle with motion controls, and fire torpedoes at enemies. These sections are just kinda okay, but I love the way they look, and the music in the last one especially is ear candy. While we're on the subject of Wario and submarines, I'm also obligated to mention Wario Master of Disguise again. Because once you find the Mastery Gem for it, the Captain Wario disguise can travel underwater in the submarine and fire projectiles. How's well? Let's move on from Mario to a spiny blue rival with Sonic Rush Adventure. In this title, you travel to different stages using different aquatic vehicles, the last one you unlock being a submarine called a Deep Typhoon. In these segments, Tails is handling the navigation and it's up to you to collect rings, power-ups, and blast any enemies in your way with the touchscreen. The interesting thing is, the enemies all appear in beat with the music, so these segments are sort of like a rhythm game. Think Elite Beat agents only Sonic themed and underwater. As far as the vehicle segments in this game are, this minigame is pretty harmless. I just wish getting the materials for these things didn't require me to replay the stages so often. Last but not least, the final game we'll be looking at today is Island Paperfield. Yet another DSiY title, and one I absolutely loved as a kid, along with the original Pop Island. It's sort of hard to get this game a genre. It revolves around you and your teammates trying to collect flags scattered across the map, and you have to bring them back to your base to score points. The opposing team is also trying to do the same, but you also have firecrackers and a few power-ups at your disposal to stop them. I guess Pop Island could be classified as a racing party game? I'm still not sure if that description works. Back to the subject at hand, in 3 of the game's maps, you can play as the thematic shooter's secondary water character, Mike, who's a submarine, and can temporarily disappear from the enemy radar while submerged in water, but only for a second or so. That's why you usually see them and their almost black counterpart, Tony, jumping when moving across the water. Not my favourite character to play as. I think I always prefer using the land characters in these games, but still fun to use on the rare occasion. Well, mutual models, it's almost goodbye. But before we wrap this list up, I want to give 2 honourable mentions for games that I know have submarines, but I've never played personally. The first being Subnautica, an ocean survival and exploration game which has a sub that can be piloted and upgraded called the Cyclops. And the second being Iron Lung, a horror game where you're stuck in a submarine, have to navigate it from harm's way with limited vision and barely any understanding of what you're actually doing. Also, apparently it's getting a film adaptation with Markiplier in it? I hope it turns out well. And that ends our list of submarine games. Honestly, it was fun revisiting and playing through all these different titles for this video. I think my personal favourites among all of these were In the Hunt, a great looking and playing shmup I think you should all give a try. It was a great time going back to Pop Island Paperfield. I honestly forgot how much I loved these games. So, what's my main drive to do this again? I don't know, this was just something I thought would make a fun video idea. That, and I was also inspired by a joke tweet someone made about a subathon. Have you played any of the games on this list? If so, what do you think of them? And what are some other submarine games that you know of that I didn't cover here? Let me know in the comments, because this sub rabbit hole goes deep. Ocean deep.